Hello everyone, welcome to another Friday Closeout. It has been a busy week, but I don't want to miss the opportunity to talk to you about something today that it's a little bit of a hard topic, if I'm being honest with you, and it's the topic of submission. Now that word probably conjures up all sorts of images in your mind, and if I'm honest for myself, a lot of those images aren't very positive because we as Americans especially, the idea of submission is not something that we like. I mean, our country was started out of this idea of independence, of being free and throwing off the old powers, and it's just kind of baked into our DNA. So when we start talking about submission, something in us kind of cringes a little bit. But submission is one of the spiritual disciplines, and it's an important one, and we don't want to neglect it. Now, if you're wearing a uniform like mine, at some point in your career, you took an oath. You signed on the dotted line. Sometimes we say, you made a blank check to Uncle Sam, right? We have already taken steps and submitted ourselves to something. So it's not an idea that is completely foreign to us as individuals in the military. But how often have we paused to think about spiritual submission and what it means as an act of faith to exercise that? Well, the book we've been working through, The Celebration of Discipline by Richard Foster, has a section on submission and spells out 7 acts of submission for a Christian. And I just want to walk through these briefly with you today because it helps us see that this practice of submitting, it's not something that we can neglect in our lives if we really want to endeavor to follow Jesus well. So the very first act of submission for the believer is to submit to God. Now that seems common sense, right? Because before you even take this step into faith, you have to say, I am going to follow God. I am going to follow Jesus. I am going to submit my life to Him. But that's the very first thing that has to happen. If you don't take that very first step as a believer, then none of the rest of this can really follow from it. Now, the second step, after you've submitted your life to God, is to submit to the Scriptures. That can mean a number of things. The first one is you are committing yourself to the study and understanding of the Bible. You can't submit to the teachings of Scripture if you don't know them yourselves. So in submitting to Scripture, you're also saying, I commit to reading and studying and to devoting some time to the study of Scripture as well. For me, that means that usually the first thing that I do in the morning is I get up, I make my coffee, I sit down at the table, and I either listen to or read passages of Scripture. It's awesome because in apps on your phone, you can just hit play and you can listen to large chapters of Scripture just as you're sitting there working or reading or drinking your coffee. The third act of submission, and this is where we start to go from God and Scripture to some of the practical outworkings of that, is to our family. Now you might be thinking, submit to my family? Yeah. So one of the first places that gets practiced in our lives is with our parents. They're probably the first people that we learn to submit to or rebel against in a lot of cases. And so we learn to submit to our family. I have to learn and had to learn, almost 15 years ago to submit to my wife. Now you might be saying, well, what do you mean by that? I mean that when we got married, when we brought our lives together, I had to learn how to compromise and how to incorporate what she needed and her ideas and her way of thinking and her way of looking at the world and of doing life together and of setting up our home. I had to learn how to incorporate all of those things into my own life, in some cases submitting to what she wanted rather than forcing what I wanted. And so one of the ways we submit is by submitting to our family and the needs of our family and sacrificing for our family. And the fourth act of submission is to our neighbors and those we meet in the course of our daily lives. Now, in the Bible, it says there are two great commandments: to love God, right? We already covered that one. And to love your neighbor. These are the people in your immediate vicinity. They could be the people who live across the street from you. If you live in the barracks, they could be the person in the next room over. They could be your co-workers. These are your immediate community. And we submit to them by serving them, by working to meet their needs, by not just living as little islands to ourselves, but by becoming integrated into the lives of our community and submitting to them and serving to them and sacrificing for them. The fifth act of submission is to the believing community. These are your churches, your fellowships of like-minded believers, maybe a chapel community if you're involved with that. And so the way that works is that you come into these communities, and again, you're not just an independent, I'm just going to do my own thing, but you're saying, I'm giving these people the permission to speak into my life, to confront me when I do wrong, to support me when I fall and when I'm down and when I'm depressed. So you're submitting to this community, to discipline if need be, and to support from them, recognizing that you can't do it on your own. You need that support from the believing community. And then the sixth act of submission is to the broken and despised. Foster says it like this: in every culture there are widows and orphans, that is, the helpless, the undefended. Our first responsibility is to be among them. As a follower of Jesus, you're not just concerned about yourself. You're not just concerned about your immediate community or your family. You're also concerned about those around you who are suffering. And this language of submission, it makes us kind of uncomfortable. But anytime you are serving those less fortunate than yourself, you're serving the downtrodden, you are submitting some part of yourself to meeting the needs of that person in that community. And so as a believer in Jesus, we submit to the broken and the despised and serve them. And finally, the seventh act of submission is to the world. Are you seeing the trend here? It's not just you, and it's not just about you. As a believer, you are connected to your community, you're connected to your neighbor, and you're connected to the world. And the actions you take as an individual ripple out and impact others. And the decisions that you make consider all these different things. Is this in line with God? Is this in line with loving my neighbor? Is this going to serve my community? Is this going to better the world that I'm in? And so it takes the focus off of just thinking about ourselves and what I can derive from this world, what's going to give me the most pleasure and the most happiness, and thinking about how we impact the world around us. And that's what this whole submission thing is about. It takes the focus off us and says, I'm going to submit and live my life for purposes that are greater than myself. And if you wear one of these, you're familiar with some of that. Because when you put this on, you're saying, I am submitting my life and my will to purposes greater than myself. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a great weekend. Go in peace.